So exteriors, one of the things that we want to pay attention to are the exteriors on the building. We want to make sure that the exteriors are relevant, that are not your parents' church. The interns in my office have this designation. You know, we do work all over the United States, and half the 300,000 churches in the United States are the gable front and the four columns. They call that phony colony. Phony colony to them means it's pretending to be something it's not. It's neoclassical. It was derived from a previous age. It's not us. And to them, that's important. It's not us. It's something else. It's somebody else's. Very affected by their environment. We want to make sure that we have architecture that's relevant and welcoming. This view of the building that we're in today is a good example of that. When we were doing the design of this, Mike Despard, who you met earlier this morning, Mike was very, very adamant about making sure that as opposed to the original phase of this project, which was somewhat closed off, good lines, really nice proportions, good color balance, a lot of things really worked from a design standpoint, but it wasn't a very welcoming building. So he wanted to make sure that in this project we were actually being very welcoming. And we're seeing the common theme of churches that are dropping their denominational brands. That's happening all the time. In fact, I noticed as I drove up today, the church next door, the Baptist church, has changed their name since the last time I was here. Now, what do they call Crossland or Crosstown or something like that? They've changed that, and we're seeing that all over the place. My own church, I go to an evangelical free church out in Salt Lake City. It's just too complicated to explain to people. It sounds like a French political organization. You know, evangelical free, what is that supposed to mean? And so we're talking about, you know, how do we make it more welcoming, more friendly, a little easier to make it relevant. You know, so we're thinking about, we're right on the edge of the mountains, you know, canyon rim or mountain top or whatever we end up with. So those kinds of things, very welcoming entrance points, very important to think about. Don't make them search for the front door. And you're going to hear this a number of times throughout the course of this, is that buildings that are largely designed around the concept of community center. I don't know if you've been to a really good, modern, relevant community center, but a good, modern, relevant community center makes it very clear for everybody in the community to be able to find the front door. Not a lot of confusion there. This is where we go. And the rest of the building can be relatively simple and austere for the most part. You can actually get away with a lot simpler building. You don't have to get into the ornate forms of the past. This is a building that largely reflects a contextual balance with what is surrounding it. This building is in Orlando, Florida. If I try to put this building in Des Moines, Iowa, or Ames, Iowa, I don't think it'd be working too well. I think we'd be having some explaining to do about the color of the building. But the form and the kinds of things that happen there are very relevant to the local area. Boy, I get about this far out of range and I'm dead in the water there. Can you back me up one, Casey? Thank you. This one also in Florida. This is a church of 14,000 people, 3,500 seats. They have 7 services on Saturday, Sunday. They have a 15,000 square foot foyer space that wraps around that worship space, and they have a very welcoming glass front. It looks like the kind of space that you are welcome to. You drive by this building at nighttime, and you look over there, and there's all kinds of activities planned inside there. Small groups meet in there, all kinds of things happening. There's restaurants, bookstores, all those kinds of things happening. So very welcoming, very accommodating front doors. Building built in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. This is a building that is just full of traditional brick facades. You know, a couple of doors on the front of the facade that you have to approach. And that's a very difficult thing for this age group to do. They don't look upon that as a welcoming building. They want something that gathers them, that brings them in. And so the drop-off zone, the clear entry point, the glass, you're seeing that sort of round-shaped space to the right on this photograph, is very important for them to be able to very quickly understand the building, what's going on inside the building, and is it approachable? Is it a place that I want to go into? This is a building, basically a box building in Walnut Creek, where the outside is very clearly defined. In this building, you can't make any mistake about it that it is a church because of that simple cross. We get a large number of churches, though I would say probably something north of 50% say, please don't make it look like a church. And then we start to hedge on that. You don't want to make it look like a warehouse, do you? No, but we don't want it to look like, and what they're communicating to me is, don't go out there and make us buy into a traditional form, because we know that the barrier that the traditional form creates for us, it's too much for us. We need something softer, especially if we're going to try and reach people who are not attending church, who were never raised in church. Something softer. This is a church that had actually been designed 7 times by a guy that I studied in college in the late 70s. They said we probably realized that we had hired the wrong guy, a great architect in Washington, D.C. area, but we probably realized we hired the wrong guy when he came in for the first meeting and said, I've always wanted to do a church. You know, they realized then that they were in a teaching mode, not a mode where they were going to be led. And so he designed it 7 times. I saw the successive stages of the design, and the problem was that there was no real strong attention paid to the budget. There was a really strong attention paid to the monumentality of the building. The building was a beautiful piece of sculpture. It really was a beautiful piece of sculpture. It would have been a keynote building along the Beltway in Washington, D.C., but they couldn't even come close to affording it. So he didn't pay attention to the stewardship aspect of it. He didn't pay attention to the time aspect of it, because they had sold their building. They were 2 years from getting kicked out. They had a year's worth of government approvals to go through and still had no design. And so they were desperate. So we got involved in this project, and they said, well, you know, one of the things we really want to do is that previous building was great, but nobody could figure out how to get in the front door. Make the front door very clear to us. Make it welcoming. And so all the way through that, and then make the worship space really true worship space. They were not of a mind to create just open blank space like the one that we're in today. They didn't. That was not their flavor. They wanted something more liturgical, but they wanted something that was going to really balance the budget. We had 58,000 square feet in this space. 8,000 of it was worship space, so we really attended to the needs of making that a liturgical space. The rest of the building we got pretty basic with to make sure that we hit our budget. We dropped about $2.5 million out of the project and got it built. This is a project in Cali, Colombia. This is a group of individuals that for 27 years a pastor has led this church. And for 17 years, he had grown the congregation from 0 to 30. And his 17th year, he was struggling with some personal issues, some family issues. His congregation obviously wasn't flourishing, and so he went and he told the district superintendent, I quit. And the district superintendent said, I can't have you quit. Nobody will take your position, and we can't give up on this city. There's 3 million people here. We're the only church in the city that you know, other than the old-style Catholic churches. And so he said, I need you to hang in there. I need you to go to your congregation and pray. So he went to the congregation, and he said, we're going to pray tonight, Sunday night, and I'd like all of you to come back. Not one single person came back. And so he went back to the superintendent, and he quit again. And the superintendent said, well, you're not giving it enough time. You really need to tell him. The same story, you know, that Michael was telling before. He went back to the congregation, stood up there, and he said, okay, we're going to get together and we're going to pray this week. I'd like to see everybody here at 4 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday. Because he knew that the only excuse that they had for not coming was sleep. And that morning, the majority of the 30 people showed up to pray. I walked in the door. They started praying every Tuesday morning at 4 o'clock. I walked in the door in August of 2010 at 4:15 in the morning, and there were 2,000 people in the room praying. They're now a church of 12,000. And they have an average income of $3,000 per household. And so what makes them relevant on the outside, they can't afford glass. They just simply can't afford those kinds of materials. This is 7,000 seats. What they can afford is light, LED lighting. So we put a reflective surface on the outside of the building that's relatively inexpensive using galvanized panels, and we'll broadcast to the city different colors of lights that are changeable. That whole notion of change is very important to this culture of people, very important to this culture of millennials. Change is not just expected, it's wanted by this group. They'll change for change's sake. So modifying things, moving things forward, changing, not remaining static, very, very important all the way through when you're thinking about the millennial mindset. And that transfers to architecture. We worked with a group in Virginia. A pastor there said to us, we want a basic box. And we want the front of that box that faces the street where people are zinging by at 55 miles an hour. It's 75,000 cars per day. We want the front of that box to be very relevant to today's culture. And in 5 years, we want to be able to strip that box down, and we want to be able to do something different cheaply that is relevant to the next stage of what's relevant to that culture. Because we're on a 5 to 15-year cycle. The days of timeless architecture in church design are done. What's timeless is adaptable, flexible architecture that allows it to change to become relevant to what is current. That's the way our culture works. Look around. Look at the way color works in our culture. There's people in New York who are determining this year what our accepted colors are going to be for next year. They'll come up with some whippy-dippy name for it, but those are going to be the colors that we accept. Those are going to be the shirts that we wear, the pants, the shoes, so on and so forth. All of that is being determined for us by the churn that comes out on a retail level in our culture. And it causes our culture to shift and change. So the ideas of creating a monument building that's going to stand the test of time, I think there's a place in the world for that. We just have a new Natural History Museum in Utah. Wonderful museum. I hope it's there for 200 years. But our churches are not that way because ministries shift and people shift too quickly. So we need to think about how we're going to change those kinds of things as time goes on, inexpensively in a stewardship kind of way. What are the things we do to the outside of the building that we can shift on? Very important for us to consider. And what's relevant locally? This Alamo-looking thing in Bulverde, Texas works great in Bulverde. It doesn't work so well in other parts of the country. Make it relevant to that culture. Make it relevant to that surrounding area. Even simple buildings like this. So many times we have pastors coming to us and just say, we just need raw space. We just need to get into the space. Create something. And if you can just do whatever you can as an architect to not adorn it. Because they know architects' tendencies are to go in and create something that is a little bit more. And oftentimes they just simply don't want that. They realize that this culture is not looking for that. So something simple. You have to decide, by the way, what that means for your area. This is a church in Alpine Church in Utah, right in the heart of LDS country. Of course, our state is 60% LDS, and in some of our cities it's much higher as you get away from Salt Lake City. But this is a church that in 2007 just scrimped and scraped to build 15,000 square feet. They went in there, they got 8,000 square feet of it finished, 7,000 feet shelled in because they couldn't afford to finish the building. But almost right off the bat, through not just good architecture, or simple architecture, I should say, but through a very creative billboard campaign, church caffeinated. And in our culture, church caffeinated is pretty out there, because caffeine is one of those no-no-nos, you know? But all of a sudden, they're advertising church caffeinated, saying, we are a church that's going someplace. We are on the move. And people just started showing up just to find out what's going on with this. So They opened the doors in November of 2007, 250 people under stress financially to get this building opened up. Today they're a church of 2,600. They're the largest Christian church in the state of Utah. And they've done it by basically building campus sites in the local area. They have 4 campus sites around the Ogden area now that serve different people in a neighborhood kind of way. Because they're attending to the idea of the millennial mindset, which is bigger is not better. This is not a group that's looking for megachurch. They're okay as long as they find small group context in that larger group, but they are not looking for that. That is not the most important thing. They're not looking to go be anonymous somewhere. That's my generation. That's the Generation Xers. Going in, doing our duty to go to church, hanging out with the people that we know, and then boom, gone. Go to fulfill the next check mark off the box. This is not that group. This is an integrated group looking for authentic community, and bigger is not better. Small is okay with them. So simple buildings, even buildings that look like retail buildings, these kinds of simple structures. This building actually looks like a strip mall. It's up in Great Falls, Montana. And they have kind of a strip mall mentality. They have coffee shops, weight rooms, children's playgrounds, things that you can see from the outside that bring people in and disarm them so that when it comes time to go to church, they're able to easily approach and come into a building like that. This is a church in Lexington, Kentucky that designed 30,000 square feet, put it out there for pricing in 2008. Was that about September, August, September, when the bottom fell out of the market? They got a phone call from their banker and said, you can't afford 30,000 square feet, you can afford 10,000 square feet. And so they got caught up in very difficult transition time economically and came back and said, you know what, we're so glad this happened, because what we really want is we want something much simpler, something much easier to bring younger people in. And right off the bat, this is a church congregation of 200. The very first Sunday, they had 51 new families show up to church here, because the building was very disarming for them. They were able to walk through the front door and not feel the same. And all the churches that surround that, all those churches that are very traditional type churches, this one stuck out as a very different type of solution.